Hi folks, we're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the idea or Plato's concept, and there have been many thinkers since Plato, and whether you want to look at Aristotle and Hobbes and the list goes on of thinkers that have bent their minds around forms of government, which form of government might work the best, what are the inherent flaws in different types of government, democracy and oligarchy, all that sort of stuff. So let's have a little look at that. Now, bear in mind that Plato, the forms of government and the options, the various options we have, haven't really changed over the last 2,000 plus years. The options that they had in over 2,000 years ago in Greece or elsewhere, for that matter, are the same options, give or take, that we have today. So now we've got more advanced technology today. The masses can be communicated with in ways that the ancient Greeks couldn't have dreamed of. But Plato believed that democracy had a series of fatal flaws, and whereas once democracy sort of begins, and they weren't necessarily looking at universal franchise at the time, but once democracy begins, it looks promising at the beginning, and maybe even gets off to a good start. But the flaws within the democratic process, the democratic government, the organs and institutions that are democratically administered or subject to democratic authority, that eventually falls to pieces. Plato argues. Now, the main flaw, I guess, is that, and this is Plato, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase a bit here, is that, well, when you've got the best and the brightest people at the head of your democracy, you effectively have a type of oligarchy anyway, even though it superficially appears democratic, or you have a limited franchise so that not everyone can vote. But if it comes to pass that lower grade people who are not the highest quality people, get into government and get into run part or all of the democratic process, then it all tends to fall to pieces. So again, I'm paraphrasing here, but Plato argued that in any situation where the best and the brightest and the most well-intentioned, as in skin in the game, committed to the bettering the outcome of the citizens, if there's any sort of dilution of that, then we've got a effectively dysfunctional democracy. It'll collapse in on itself, and some sort of oligarchy or worse, tyranny would replace it. Now, we need to sort of, I guess, come to grips with the idea that certainly since the early 1990s, if not a little bit earlier, but around that time, the globalists, as their influence and power has increased, they have, with much aggression and determination, sought to debase the Western democracies. Now, the Western democracies happen to be the wealthiest, most prosperous places in the world. So this is where the globalists want to hang out. This is where the money is. This is where the profits to be made. So, this is where they started flexing their tyrannical muscles. So they wanted to, democracy gets in the way, and particularly universal franchise, that particularly gets in the way. And something that really irks the globalists is universal franchise. It means that the great unwashed lowlifes have a say in government and have a degree of power and influence over things that is considered nothing more than unspeakably outrageous from the globalist elite, with a morally superior people perspective. So what the globalists did was they took over the party machinery, and because most democracies have got 2, maybe 3 political parties that are the main parties, it didn't take much for the globalists to be able to infiltrate those political party machines. This is the background machinery, the Democrat Party machine, the Republican Party machine. Didn't take much for them to infiltrate those and effectively take them over. So rather than just write democracy off or to stop it entirely, they left the illusion of it in place. But in fact, there was an illusion because the globalists were selecting everybody who was going to hold political office, whether they be just the stooges like ARC or Jasmine Crockett or something in the US. Imagine the IQ of those people. I mean, seriously. And barmaids and people who worked on the front desk of some cheap hotel. But these are so everyone that serves in the Congress, with maybe a handful of exceptions, everyone that serves in the Congress in the United States is hand-picked in effect by the globalists. So that's one way of neutralizing democracy. Another one is to, of course, rig the votes. And again, the globalists are quite famous. Look how they installed Joe Biden in 2020, for goodness sakes. So the globalists have effectively neutralized democracy all around the Western world as it is. And there are a few outliers, like the AfD in Germany or Geert Wilders in Holland, Nigel Farage, and to some extent, at least in Britain, Donald Trump in the US. So there are outliers that fall outside of their control. But as was indicated, recently in the federal Australian election, the only political party capable of really fighting back against the globalists only got like 6 or 7% of the total vote. So, whereas the pro-globalist parties, the uni parties, got 80% of the vote. So it goes to show how effective the globalists have been. But they might as well have just come out and said, we're cancelling all votes. You're not going to get any more votes. Voting and democracy, as we know, it's ended. They might as well have done that, but they've achieved it through other means. And to do that, they've installed the lowest quality people into the body's politic. And so this comes back to Plato's point that unless you have the very best in there and the most committed, or chosen from among the best, then this is inevitably the outcome. And the globalists have sort of ushered this in and put it on. But having a look at democracy comes in all sorts of different forms, and this is something that isn't really understood, and its ideological application is equally misunderstood. For example, there's some people we know down the road, and they've got a daughter who'd be, I don't know, she'd be 20 years old, I suppose. She's at university studying sociology. And democracy, as far as she's concerned, is equal outcomes for Black lesbians. If all LGBTQ people are getting equal outcomes with straight white males, then that's democracy. Now, how she can perceive, or anyone can perceive that, but that's the concept of democracy that's being taught in colleges and schools today. And you see this reinforced in the media and in entertainment programs that have got propaganda shoveled into it, movies even. So this is the widely held view that equal outcomes for Black lesbians is what democracy is. All equal outcomes for the least advantaged citizens. That's democracy. Whereas the idea of democracy is everyone gets the right to vote, everyone is equal before the law. That's not seen as democracy. But that's how I understood democracy as I was growing up. That was everyone got the right to vote, one value. Everyone's got everyone is equal before the law. That's everyone has access to education, as in the government schooling, and so on. So this to me was, well, that's democracy, and the equality of opportunity. Everyone gets the right to go to school. Not everyone gets the right to come first, but everyone gets the right to go to school. Same as at school, everyone had the right to participate in sports at school, but not everyone was going to get picked for the team. There were kids that are going to be better than you. They're going to be more athletic or fitter, or they trained harder, or whatever the case may be. So the concepts, even at school, I remember the murmurings of kids going, "It's not fair. I'm not getting picked for the team." The guys that say in the football team, the guys in the football team used to get the hottest chicks, and so there were guys that I knew that wanted to get picked to the football team, not because they were the best or they were good at football, or just because they would have better access to hot chicks, and that's hardly that's hard. I do understand the thinking, but the reality was, if you wanted to get that place in the team, you had to train harder. maybe you're some scrawny punk that wouldn't have got it anyway. So the idea of democracy as what it is, that in itself has been perverted, again, more by globalist influences. Because as soon as you say, well, equal outcomes is what democracy is, then you've subverted democracy, and it doesn't exist anymore, provided you can get enough people to see it that way. And then once you see it that way, then you have the right to rig elections, because the morally inferior people can't be allowed to take control or roll back the lesbian marriage laws or something like that. Now, if you look through democracy as it was practiced in ancient Athens in Greece and ancient Rome, and through in various forms, in various degrees of seriousness of application and observance and so on, it waxed and waned and gone back and forth many times. If you look Machiavelli, The Prince, and look at Machiavelli's view, and as much as say he was cunning and deceitful, real politic was certainly what he was about. And he was, well, why do this if it doesn't work? Why do that if you dilute your power but achieve nothing or accomplish nothing in return? So democracy has been, I think, in every society. Plato sort of agrees with this, or I think Plato may have been the first to state it. Really, you don't get anything more than 20 to 25% of any given population, excuse me, that is well informed enough and bright enough and has skin in the game enough and this to be able to vote, to be sufficiently well informed on the issues and the requirements of government to be able to vote. And if you're just going to vote yourself more money, then you're no longer a citizen acting in the common good. If you want to vote for more wealth creation, then that's different. If you want to vote for obligations to go with benefits, that's the right to vote. So the right to vote was always determined that not many people could actually vote, because not many people could understand the issues. Now, this was the dilemma that the British had in 1830 when they were looking at reforming their political system. Something in the order of, I'm just going from memory, 8 to 10% of the adults had the right to vote, or I think it was mostly adult men had the right to vote. Now, the fear or concern, and quite genuine, was if that's expanded, then we have to make sure it doesn't draw in people who haven't got no idea what they're doing. The vote is a precious thing, and therefore you must be well informed. It is your obligation to be well informed on the issues before you cast your vote and before you have the right to cast the vote. Now, you're looking at sort of around by the 1880s, something like 2/3 of the population over the age of 23, I think it was back at the time, and there were various property and income qualifications, had the right to vote. Now, that was probably at its zenith. I don't think if it went any further than that, it was going to bring in people who didn't understand the issues and probably weren't bright enough to understand the issues, and they're living so hand to mouth that they don't give a shit anyway. They want more handouts, and that's really some way of ameliorating their meager existence. So to go beyond that was not. Now, women were viewed as voting too emotionally, something that's proved to be true. So there was women over the age of 30, typically who came from well-to-do families. They would have the right to vote. Maybe their husband had died and inherited the estate and so on. So there was a number, quite a few, but not. It wasn't universal franchise, and that was the zenith, I think, of the well-informed voter democracy. Anything beyond that, it was going to go down the other way. Now, at this point in time, no one had considered what total war would be. World War I, World War II, all the human and financial resources of the state are mobilized to prosecute the war. No one had perceived that would come, and that was the critical change in the dynamic that gave the vote. Because if you're going to lay your life down by the million, which people did, then you should have the right to vote, which you should, by the way. If you're going to get drafted into the army like Vietnam at 18, then you should have the right to vote at 18. I agree with that too. But those were they were extending the franchise, the vote, to people on the basis of the government's need, in this case for soldiers and appropriation of the resources of the state and so on. And so democracy then became perverted. It was no longer who's the best informed, who are they going to be the best citizens, but a trade-off between we need this, so we'll give you that. And that was the nail in the coffin, I think, for modern democracy. Now, sure, it worked for a few years. I think it worked passably well, really, for 25 years, give or take. But then the globalists came along and thought, no, this is no longer suits our purpose, no longer suits our needs. We have to gut and destroy and undermine democracy as it is currently practiced, and really run the world as an international oligarchy, which is where we are now. And the consent of the people was never asked. Mass migration, for example, was imposed. It was never agreed to. And the list goes on. Now, the people that currently sit in governments, and certainly that sit in the World Economic Forum, have such utter contempt for the masses that something, an Armageddon scenario, like an apocalyptic scenario like the Black Death, they would probably see that as some sort of a blessing. I mean, that's where we are now. That's the tragedy. Can democracy be revived? I believe it can be, but I don't think it'll be in the universal franchise form that we've seen. I think if democracy is to mean something, it has to be where informed people do choose their government. When I sit down or meet or talk to politicians today, in Australia or even elsewhere, I'm beyond belief at how low quality these people are. We're talking, D, E, F class people. The A and B class people are almost nowhere to be seen, and the sort of people people that represent the community. So that they're picking, an IQ 80 sort of woman that would work on sweeping the floor, and so we're going to have her as your local representative, all selected by the globalist machine, not because the people asked for or wanted it. Such is the situation we see today. But Plato, over 2,000 years ago, and others since, realized the flaws of different forms of government, and really not much has changed. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.